Hey everybody, welcome to the What is Money Show. I am sitting down today with Eric Weiss. Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you, man. We've been talking about this for a long time. And I think today it's going to be kind of a diverse conversation. We're going to talk a little bit about Genghis Khan. And then I think we're going to fast forward into the modern day a bit to talk about Bitcoin, digital assets, and maybe a little bit of your story in orange pilling Mr. Michael Saylor. So with that, I'm going to open by reading an excerpt from the book, which you've read. I've read a little bit of in preparation for this. The book is titled Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World.
It's a good book.
It is a good book. So I'm just going to open with one description of Mr. Genghis Khan here, and then we can get into a little bit of conversation about him. So this is a description of Genghis Khan by the chronicler Giuliani, who described him as, quote, a man of tall stature, of vigorous build, robust in body, the hair on his face scanty and turned white, with cat's eyes, possessed of dedicated energy, discernment, genius, and understanding, awe-striking, a butcher, just, resolute, an overthrower of enemies, intrepid, sanguinary, and cruel, unquote. So quite the introduction.
I mean, I wasn't there. I wasn't there in the year 1200 or whenever that might have been. But I read the same book, and I think there are a lot of interesting aspects about Genghis Khan to me. One thing that I find interesting in general is I just didn't get taught about him a lot in school here in America, which based on how influential he was is pretty surprising to me. I think his physical stature and the physical description, is not something I've ever really thought much about. But I do think about a couple of aspects. Number one, I think the land that he conquered is just absolutely absurd. By today's measures, I think it would be like about 3 billion of the 8 billion population would have been territory that ultimately fell under his control. So that's just, it's mind-boggling to me, right? And then the other things that kind of stand out to me is how someone could be so ruthless, such a shrewd military general, so to speak, and conquer so many different civilizations, but also have such incredibly positive and relevant contributions to society. In some ways, he was actually like maybe one of the first feminists, which is kind of interesting to me. I think the way that he turned out to be the way he was is they had kidnapped his mother when he was really young, and he went after I forget the name of the sex. Maybe it was like the Merkit, I think, but who like kidnapped his mom. Right. And conquered them, killed them all, got his mom back. And that kind of started his, reign of terror. But along with that, he also outlawed the kidnapping of women. He outlawed the selling of women to be wives, which, sounds like, big deal. But prior to that time, that's not how it was done. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Some other things that he did that like kind of stick with me are he conquered so many different civilizations and different religious kind of groups that he had this very evolved perspective on religion, where he didn't mandate that other people adopted his religion. He kind of respected all religions. He took it a step further and even kind of had tax amnesty for all religions. And he made other people in his empire honor every religion. He did lots of very, things in that vein. For example, they didn't have diplomatic immunity back in those days. Like you couldn't just send your warring generals to have a conversation with the opposing side and not kill them. But he kind of established that as well. So he did a lot of things like that that I think, were surprising to me. But then I'm sure, as it relates to kind of the topics that we're interested in, maybe the monetary aspects and the currency and trade aspects are, maybe most relevant.
So first of all, he's Mongolian.
Yeah.
But it's not, is there a physical description of it? I mean, I know we just read one, but they're not, the Mongolian that we conceive of today, I don't think is what he looked like back then, right? Was it sort of like a blend of Asian, Russian, Indian, something
exactly.
like that? Yeah.
Exactly. I mean, I just go from kind of the renderings that I've seen, and that's exactly a kind of a Russian Asian kind of look. Yeah. I just know that as kind as he might be, I'm glad I didn't get to meet him.
And I've heard that he sired something like 10% of the world's population. Like you could trace the descendancy back to him. Is that accurate?
That I don't know, but that kind of dovetails nicely into like one of his great strategies, which was after he would conquer a people, instead of enslaving them and causing this future conflict and future strife and, kind of animosity, he went the other way, and he would marry his sons or daughters into the families that he conquered. And kind of like integrate them that way, which is just like so forward looking. The other thing, it kind of reminds me of something else that was a huge departure that he did from previous rulers. Previously, people promoted and gave power based on nepotism, right? I'm going to put my son in charge of this army. I'm going to put my son in charge of this. And he didn't do that at all. As a matter of fact, he did not empower his family all that much. He did it based exclusively on merit and loyalty. So that was a big departure as well. And I think a lot of, why he was so successful.
Yeah. It's, the title really frames it up nicely, is that although he's often considered kind of this ruthless tyrant, ancient ruthless tyrant, many of the practices he put in place are still foundational to the modern world today, right? Like you mentioned,
absolutely,
tax amnesty. I'll read, and to the point of religious tolerance, I'll read another excerpt here that I thought was really interesting. And this, there's a bit of a backstory here, but he was fleeing from one of his enemies. They had basically reached the muddy waters of this pond. They have nothing to drink. They have nothing to eat. And then out of the woods comes this wild horse. And then apparently, so one of his riders chases down the horse, catches it, kills it, skins it. They don't have anything to cook with. So they actually use the horse's skin as a boiling bag. They put the horse meat in the skin. They start a fire with dried dung. They heat stones, and then they drop the heated stones into the water and horse meat in the horse's skin bag, and they eat boiled horse meat. So it's like totally amazing, badass stuff. And then after that, because the horse was such symbolic significance to the Mongols, they took this as a sign. It was a time where they were kind of on the ropes, but this horse came along and saved them. So they had this, that backstory leads into this little excerpt here. It says, quote, "The event acquired a symbolic representation of the diversity of the Mongol people based on mutual commitment and loyalty that transcended kinship, ethnicity, and religion. The 19 men with Temujin Khan came from 9 different tribes. Probably only Temujin and his brother Kasar were actually from the Mongol clans. The others included Merkid, Khitan, and Karyid, whereas Temujin was a devout shamanist who worshipped the eternal blue sky and the god mountain of Burkhan Khaldun. The 19 included several Christians, 3 Muslims, and several Buddhists. They were united only in their devotion to Temujin and their oath to him and each other. The oath sworn at Baljuna, which was the little pond they were at, created a type of brotherhood, and in transcending kinship, ethnicity, and religion, it came close to being a type of modern civic citizenship based upon personal choice and commitment. This connection became a metaphor for the new type of community among Temujin's followers that would eventually dominate as the basis of unity within the Mongol Empire. So to your earlier point, this guy was like way ahead of his time, where
way ahead. Right?
I mean, historically, it was like you stuck with your tribe, so to speak, or your religion, and he has a unity based on choice, which is something we take for granted in the modern age.
Choice and not so much choice. But I mean, if you don't choose to be a part of it, you're probably going to end up dead. But I mean, he aggregated a lot of cultures, right? Races, religions, etc. And in doing so, he didn't try to, Temujin, obviously, for those who don't know, Temujin is Genghis Khan's real name, right? So that, when you're aggregating all these cultures, it occurred to him, which is pretty impressive, that you need to make room for everybody. If you try to force everybody into, the likeness that you want, you're going to have some pretty upset people and you're going to have constant warring. So he did kind of have this absolute religious freedom, and he did institute kind of laws, as you said earlier, that are still so relevant today. Like stealing used to be fairly legal.
Mm-hmm.
That's how people got stuff. And not only did he outlaw stealing, but he implemented this lost and found law, where if you found something that wasn't yours, you were obligated to return it to whomever it belonged to. So he had kind of this really interesting, evolved view, like you said, on bringing people together. And he put his money where his mouth is. He also, he exempted religion from taxes as well, which is pretty amazing foresight. I think he did it for doctors too, but religion in particular. And I guess the view was, if you're going to rule people, it's better to rule happy people.
Yes. Yeah. To your point, unity based on personal choice, but under the canopy of no choice. It's like his tyranny. There's no alternative to that. But within that, you have choice of kind of.
I mean, contrast that with the Incas, right? Who are they conquered you and they gave you a choice. You could die or you could be a slave for, I think it was 6 years. And if you survived the 6 years, you got your freedom. It's a pretty shitty choice, right?
Yeah.
Versus, Genghis Khan's choice, which is, hey, live under a rule-based free society with me and, just follow what they thought were good, fair laws at the time.
Yeah.
And you can have a good life. So not such a bad conqueror, not the image that we have that gets portrayed of him. Right.
Yes. Right. And the other point there was the people that he conquered, so long as they didn't have a history of treachery of any kind, that he actually accepted them. They were just immediately citizens within his group there. And so on the topic of conquering, got another excerpt here.
Okay.
One way to maybe think of him was as the ultimate entrepreneur of warfare. I mean, he was fighting a lot of his life, and he was very sophisticated in both his strategies and the technologies he used. So I'll read this here. Quote, the Mongol invaders rolled up their newly constructed siege engines, catapults, trebuchets, and mangonels that hurled not only stones and fire, as besieging armies had done for centuries, but also pots of burning liquids, exploding devices, and incendiary materials. They maneuvered immense crossbows mounted on wheels, and great teams of men pushed in portable towers with retractable ladders from which they could shoot down the defenders of the walls. At the same time that they attacked through the air, miners went to work digging into the earth to undermine the walls by sapping. During the awesome display of technological prowess in the air, on the land and beneath the earth, Genghis Khan heightened the psychological tension by forcing prisoners, in some cases the captured comrades of the men still in the citadel, to rush forward until their bodies filled up the moat and made live ramparts over which other prisoners pushed the engines of war. I mean, this guy was...
He was a no bullshit kind of guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like you said, I mean, I guess that would be a nice way to categorize it as a great entrepreneur of war. But I mean, he fought to win, right? And he was resourceful, and he thought outside the box. Mm-hmm. And he was very creative, both technologically as well as the strategies of how they would attack and create the illusions that they were bigger than they were. They didn't always have like the biggest armies. And I haven't read the book, all that recently, but I remember he had his men light like 10 campfires for every person, one night, so that it would appear that their army was much larger than it was. And just the man was good at warfare. Obviously, you don't conquer half the planet if you're not.
Yeah. There's another tale of him. I'll be kind of messing up the details here, but they were rushing towards an enemy that thought he was, 2,000 miles away, but he had people set up fresh horses for him in succession going towards the enemy.
I remember that.
So he could just ride straight through for like 2 days or however long it was. And just every time a horse got tired, he'd swap it out for another one.
It's amazing. Yeah. I remember that excerpt too. Yeah. I mean, just stuff like that, thinking outside the box, so forward looking, really interesting. I mean, for anybody that hasn't read the book, I think it's not a boring read, right? It's pretty cool stuff.
It's so well written, and just gives you, like we come from this, we had to fight and figure things out to get to the civilization we're at today. So it's almost like you're looking, it's almost like an archaeological dig into culture and civilization. Like, how did we get here? And there's a bit of a paradox, right? In that this guy had great power, but he was also using that power to create something that would ultimately decentralize power, these cultural norms and things.
Yeah.
So,
and I think actually it occurs to me as you say it, that it's in the root of the word of civilization. He really did bring a lot of civility that wasn't there. So yes, there was the brutal warring and conquering and taking over the land, but there was also civility. There was law. There was, you can't steal. You can't do all these things that we take for granted now that seem kind of like common sense. And then he also brought it right into the financial sector, right? Mm-hmm. And as he had conquered this vast area where barter obviously has its shortcomings, you can't swap a sable coat for a thing of grain, right? Like It would take a lot of grain. So they needed commerce. And he instituted, gold coins and silver coins. And then later, I believe, instituted the first paper money and banknotes. I don't know how to pronounce it. It was spelled like souks or something. But yeah, so I don't know. I don't have a Saylor-esque knowledge of the entire world at that time, but I think that he gets credit in some of the things that I read for the first paper banknotes.
Yeah, it's really interesting that it's almost like we have to go through this process to get to where we are today. It's not like you can just turn on civility. There has to be this laying of the bedrock. And maybe one way to think about this is a strong man has to come to power so that he can lay down rules under which everyone else can kind of trade and develop civility. Because absent that, you just have, like you said, people just stealing from each other or, stealing wives. That was a big practice, as you said, before he laid down these rules. So,
but it's interesting because if you take what you said and you apply it to Genghis Khan, you can see how the laws that he made were influenced by the specific things that he viewed as negative that occurred in his life. His reign of conquering started because his mom was kidnapped from him when he was young. And so you can see how that influenced the laws where he said, hey, no kidnapping of women. He had tremendous respect for women. later in his life, and he made it illegal to even sell women as a wife. When there was all kinds of problems later in his life as he got older, the only person that seemed to be able to get through to him was his wife. I think her name was Bort. But, so he had tremendous respect for women because of the things that happened in his life. And you could see the way that translated into civil laws that he implemented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And all of this in my mind, like, it seems like it's a prerequisite to, again, things we take for granted today, like the rule of law, like private property rights, like the fact that we have this, we have in the US, at least, we have this nation state above us that sets the rules. Yep. And we all get to cooperate within the rules itself. And then in theory, the rules don't change over time. So there's peace, frankly.
Right. Except for the last 24 months, they seem to be changing a lot. It's
deteriorating quickly. And as we've talked about a lot, monetary inflation is a twisting of the rules. But I'll read one more excerpt here that, Khan was it seems like he deeply understood this principle. It says, quote, Genghis Khan recognized that warfare was not a sporting contest or a mere match between rivals. It was a total commitment of one people against another. Victory did not come to the one who played by the rules. It came to the one who made the rules and imposed them on his enemy. Triumph could not be partial. It was complete, total, and undeniable, or it was nothing. Unquote. So,
whoa, that is some incredibly strong language, huh?
Right. And it seems like something we carry into today. Like even the United States sort of behaves on that same paradigm, right? It's like, we're going to go around the world and make the rules.
The Maxis certainly do. But yeah, I mean, I didn't remember that exact passage, but that's the feeling that you come away with after reading about him. You could soften it by saying, he kind of played to win, but it was at all costs. It was every bit of, he was ready to die every time he went into battle. And in the books, they spent a decent amount of time when he had the opportunity, him contemplating when to go to battle and when not. And kind of some of those Sun Tzu kind of things about, if evenly matched or whatever, although he seemed to not shy away from a fight, but he picked his spots and used a lot of strategy. But you just get the feeling, and maybe it's, some of the liberties of the authors, and the authors were fans of him and were kind of subject to some of that interpretation, but it was not skin in the game, it was soul in the game. And he was prepared to lay down his life for every single victory.
Yeah, which is something that we've diverged from so far in the modern age, right? Like our leaders today, they don't lead from the front. They don't have soul in the game, not even skin in the game. They're just making decisions.
They don't stand for anything except polling. They make decisions based on what polling says will get them reelected and stay in power.
Yes, exactly. And I think this conversation about rules and rulemaking kind of being the ultimate source of power, which is intuitive, right? If you can make the rules in a game, that's effectively the power to win in perpetuity. And so I think this is good framing for the importance of Bitcoin, actually. As I've often described it, it's the first, game of money that no one can change the rules. So instead of people fighting over controlling the rule-making apparatus, it's like everyone just falls in line and plays by the rules effectively, which in theory will lead us to a much more productive, prosperous society.
I agree. I mean, I guess in the past, we've had the rules. The rules haven't been the problem. It's that there are rulers who can change the rules, right? So I think, with Bitcoin, we've got the rules, we just don't have the rulers. And I think that's the strength of the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm reminded of a quote: "Sovereign is he who can make the exception." It's like whatever guy owns.
That's a great quote.
The rule making or the rule breaking, I guess you could say, if they have the option to break the rules, and they're
one and the same, I guess, right?
Yeah.
But that's and it's particularly disgusting if you think about our current politicians in this country and just how many examples we've seen of rules for thee, but not for me, over the recent past, where you must wear a mask, right? And then it'll be XYZ politician doing whatever, having lunch at, French Laundry or something after you tell people you can't do it if you're the governor of California or something. And just all these ridiculous exceptions of those rule breakers. They make the rules and then they give themselves the divine right to break the rules.
Yes.
Same thing was there with Obamacare too, right? The only people in the country who weren't subject to Obamacare were members of Congress.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If it's so good for everyone, why can't it be for you too?
Yeah. It's so asinine, really. And the same is true with I think there are exceptions to these different mandates they're talking about passing too, right? Where Congress and their staff are not subject to different, I don't know if it's vaccine related or not, but
they're seemingly never subject to any of the rules they make. And even if they're legally subject, they seem to just skirt them.
Right.
And there's no end to that, right? Even if it's like Fed governors and Fed presidents transacting when they shouldn't, it's like there's this sense that they're above the law. I mean,
because they are in many ways.
Power corrupts.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And then I'm reminded too of the revolving door situation where a lot of politicians will go and actually draft legislation that they then rotate out into industry after as a consultant to exploit the loopholes in the legislation that they themselves drafted. And,
it's unbelievable.
The problem is that everyone is not under the same canopy of law. And that's at least, I know we're early days here, but I think that's a great promise of Bitcoin, is to just put everyone under one unbreakable law of money, at least.
I completely agree. I think that one of the things that I like best about Bitcoin, although there are like tons of aspects that I love, but one of my favorite as it's applied to kind of modern day situation is that I think that Bitcoin has a chance to be a great unifier among a very divided political situation here in the United States. It truly appeals to the left and the Democrats in that it is maybe the only thing that can bridge this wealth gap and protect the wages of wage earners so that they can maintain their purchasing power. And that divide doesn't just benefit the asset owning class whose the assets they own inflate in value, and that wealth gap divides. So I think they should embrace it. And then I also think the kind of more capitalist free market right side obviously will also embrace it. So I think it has the chance to really get bipartisan support and potentially bring people in this country together.
I agree completely. And I harbor this hope actually that at some point, and you see this a little bit with like Senator Loomis. I don't know if you've seen these videos of her recently, but she's indicting policymakers, saying you have in many ways destroyed this country through irresponsible policy and monetary policy largely. And I hold out this hope that we'll wake up and realize that really Bitcoin embodies the foundational principles of America, right? It is
absolutely
honest money, rule of law. It's the ultimate private property right. I mean, that's what this country was built on. The reason we're wealthy and successful and dominant is because we adhered to those principles originally.
I couldn't agree with every word that you just said more. It is, I have that exact thought often. Bitcoin stands for everything that this country was founded upon. And other than one trying to stake out their territory, look out for their own personal interests, or, bend to the will of someone who has influence upon them, you can't imagine why anyone who loves any aspect of this country would not love Bitcoin. And that's why I think it really could be a great uniter for all of us, because there's not a lot there to object to. Like, find me what's unfair about it. It's truly fair. And to your point, I mean, in addition to being fair and good monetarily, it's also consistent with what's made this country great, technological advance and being leaders in that, and freedom. And I must say that I'm surprised, but also encouraged at the direction the regulatory environment is going. I have tremendous respect for Gary Gensler. I'm sure that, a lot of hardcore crypto and maxi people don't want any regulation of any kind, but I also don't think that's pragmatic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's extraordinarily knowledgeable. If anyone really is interested in this space, they should watch the course that he taught for MIT. There's 26 hours of it online. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that knows more about this stuff than he does. I mean, he certainly knows more than I do. I was blown away by the course. So the fact that he has such reverence for, Satoshi and Bitcoin, I think it's just an amazing stroke of luck for us that he happens to be the regulator with the most influence right now in regulating Bitcoin. So, I mean, that's great. I think the administration as a whole is being fairly pragmatic and looking for ways to regulate things, which, sorry, but I think we have to expect some fair regulation. So I think we're in good shape, and that's a Democratic administration. And then if you look at the Senate and senators and Congress people on the right side, like Senator Lummis and others who are also in favor of it. I mean, even just look at those Republican senators and look at Jack Dorsey, right? Mm-hmm. I think most people, after he kicked Trump off the platform, right, probably view Jack as way more left than right. And there you have it, right? That's both sides of the aisle coming together for this awesome thing called Bitcoin that levels the playing field for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it completely makes sense, especially when you consider how much more politically divisive the country has become post 1971, right? It's like when we move off of a hard money standard, and there's a lot of discussion around the precise mechanisms of this, but it tracks nicely is that the political polarity has become much worse in the past 50 years. And so it would make sense that something like Bitcoin could, take it the other direction, right? Back to a hard money standard. So I
agree. I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that, for this political divide. I think people are searching for identity, and social media has played a big role in that as well, allowing people to kind of group. I also think, with as science evolves, people seem to be less tied to their religious beliefs, and they're looking for social groups to belong to that have a belief system that's more in line with theirs. And I think that's helped polarize the political landscape as well. But it would be great if we found something like Bitcoin or some other things that people could actually get together on and agree. And that might even bring some more civility to other topics. Once you have one area of agreement, maybe you can tackle some other things where maybe you have more overlap of, positive overlap than people think. Yeah,
I agree. I've been thinking a lot about this, like what's going on in the world, what's with all the cultural degradation and such. And I mean, my current view, and I've been criticized for this view, but I actually think economics is upstream from most of this. So like we know that fiat currency is increasing the wealth disparity. Like that's mechanically understood. And then I think a lot of the political divisiveness flows from that, right? You just have more people dispossessed in the wealth hierarchy. So they're mad. They want to go and, vote themselves UBI or whatever benefit it is. And then you have at the other end of the spectrum, you have people trying to protect their interests, protect their wealth from being redistributed from. So I just don't think we could ever have any semblance of political unity without hard money.
I haven't given that a lot of thought, but they're definitely connected, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's exactly what you said. It's if you rob Peter to pay Paul, you're always going to have Paul's support.
Exactly.
And regardless of who's in power, they're intent on taking from those that have only because there are more that have not. If there were more that had, it would not be the case, but they need to curry the favor of the majority. So they're going to take from the minority to give to the majority just to get their vote, just to stay in power, just to keep this thing going.
Yeah.
And it's a hard cycle to break.
Yeah. Again, without Bitcoin, I don't even know that it's possible, right? Because so long as taking is an option, whatever group is the most angry is going to try to get in that position of taking.
Yeah, it goes back to kind of Saylor's, phrase that he coined a little bit, Bitcoin is hope. And it's just amazing in how many different situations that phrase holds true.
Absolutely. I guess the greatest thing we could hope for coming out of the US regulatory establishment is just kind of that do not harm approach that they took with the internet, which is to just let the free market decide, let the free market figure it out. I'm not, clearly there'll be regulations on exchanges and whatnot, but as far as trying to stop Bitcoin or, Executive Order 6102 Bitcoin, things like this, I just think all of those measures would blow up in the regulator's face.
I actually think that a degree of regulation is incredibly good and helpful for Bitcoin. I know that a lot of folks want this to be a hardcore libertarian kind of thing with no oversight. But I think in order for Bitcoin to achieve its potential, we do need some institutional adoption. And institutional adoption is not going to come without things like basic anti-money laundering, know your client, anti-terrorism kind of checks, right? It's part of that civilization thing that we talked about earlier, right? We do need to apply some civility even to money. And so I think that those things are good things. Corporations, obviously MicroStrategy, a little bit of a gutsy leader in that space, but other corporations will have so much more confidence and ability to put their money in it to protect themselves from inflation if there are some rules and regulations that protect investors, protect them, protect their shareholders, give them fair tax accounting, et cetera.
Where do you think we are today on that front? Like what is lacking for more institutional adoption to take place? Is there a certain area of regulation that's especially weak in your view?
The single biggest thing stopping more large corporations from putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet is the accounting aspect. It's incredibly punitive. That is by far the biggest thing. In lay terms, I'm not a CPA, but in lay terms, what it is if a publicly traded company that's subject to GAAP accounting buys Bitcoin, if the value of that Bitcoin goes down, they have to mark it down to the lowest price, even if it comes back up. So it could go down 50% and then go up 500%. They have to keep it on their books at that lower price. What's even more vicious about that is they don't take like a balance sheet asset loss. They have to take an operating loss. So their earnings will be impaired. Now, if you're going the MicroStrategy route and you're willing to make it such a massive part of the asset value of the company that every prospective investor is kind of forced to parse through it, look at the number of Bitcoin, multiply by the current price, and kind of determine a value and sift through it, great. If you're Apple and you have 60, 80 billion in cash, whatever it is, and you decide you want to buy 5 billion worth of Bitcoin, which doesn't really move the needle for you as a company, but then we have a 50% downdraft and you've got to mark that down by 2.5 billion and you miss earnings by 10 cents because your Bitcoin went down by 2.5 billion, their attitude is fuck that. Like, it's not worth it. People are not going to parse Apple's balance sheet and earnings to find this little $5 billion thing, right? So it's not worth it for those big companies. If we get fair treatment in accounting, which was what all that FASB and all those comments things were about that people were talking about on Twitter, if we get, federal accounting board to kind of say, hey, let's treat it this way like we treat other, similar assets, then I think we're going to see mass adoption at a corporate level.
Is that so? It's mark to market down only? They don't mark it, but really? So the lowest it's ever been is what you carry it at.
And it hits you as an operating loss as well, like your business lost money. I know it's
that makes no sense. Wow.
It's only now. The caveat is it's only for those subject to GAAP accounting, right? Which is not everyone, but certainly every publicly traded company in the United States is. But yeah, it literally makes no sense. It's just unfair.
And that treatment is unique to Bitcoin and crypto?
It is.
I mean, that seems just purposefully punitive, I mean, that makes no sense.
Even worse than punitive, maybe from FASB's perspective, is it's misleading, right?
Mhm.
You should be wanting to get to the truth and an accurate depiction of value.
Yeah.
And I forget what other assets it may pertain to, that type of accounting, but say it's like, I think it might pertain to other kinds of property. I'm not sure. I may be misspeaking here, but you may not know what the price of a building is 24/7 because it doesn't trade 24/7, 365. Right. But we know what the price of Bitcoin is. Yes. You can mark this to market accurately. Yeah. And to represent it not marked to market accurately is doing all investors a disservice.
Right. And the mark to market is as of a financial statement close, right? It's not intra period, whatever Bitcoin draws down to, they're having to mark that. Do you know?
That I don't, as the current.
I was just thinking,
I don't know.
I was thinking like in March 2020, when we had that really sharp drawdown to whatever it was, $3,800. In that case, would all of these FASB compliant businesses be required to mark down their stash?
Yes.
Wow, that makes no fucking sense. Hey, everybody. As you've no doubt learned by watching this show, Bitcoin is the single most important asset you can own in the 21st century. And one of the most important companies in Bitcoin today is NYDIG. NYDIG's mission is to get Bitcoin into the hands of as many people as possible. One of the ways they are accomplishing this mission is by empowering banks and financial technology companies to offer their own Bitcoin products and services. As a true game changer in the industry, NYDIG is safely unlocking the power of Bitcoin for forward-thinking individuals and institutions alike. Led by Robbie Gutman, Yin Zhao, and Ross Stevens, NYDIG has absolutely exploded onto the Bitcoin scene recently and has quickly become a leader in this space. So, whether you are a professional investor looking for asset management services or a company looking to white label your own Bitcoin product or service, consider NYDIG your single source solution for everything Bitcoin. Tell me about how you got introduced to Bitcoin.
Sure. So I started out, I'll give 3 seconds of context. I started out as a US government bond trader out of undergrad. Then I went to Columbia Business School, and then I got into venture capital and private equity. And I was doing primarily internet VC, where we were investing in companies that were using the internet as a real tool for their business, not slapping a .com at the end of the name. And it was in that context that I kind of realized what the internet was good for. And at the time, it was really good for transmitting information around the world. Think email, posting pictures, stuff like that. It was not good for transmitting value. And so in 2013, I went to a Bitcoin conference in Miami. And what struck me was this was the first time that I had seen the internet being used for transmitting value safely and securely, where party A didn't need to know party B, and it was a trustless environment. And my mind was kind of blown. I was positive that this was going to be something. And I spent like the next, I don't remember how long it was, but a couple months thinking through every way that I might play this, so to speak, right? Should I start a business in this space? I've got the execution risk of starting a business, and what kind of business could I even start? I could do a directory of companies that, accept Bitcoin or something. And so that's kind of where my head was at. And I came to the conclusion that if this was going to be a thing, that there was no point taking the execution risk, that the value of the liquid asset, the Bitcoin, would go up in value. And so in December of 2013, actually as depicted on the full node sculpture, December 20th, 2013, I bought my first Bitcoin at like $780 per Bitcoin. And I bought a decent amount. But it was a different world back then.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a really high risk, not even a venture capital investment. It was kind of more like a passion buy kind of thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted this to be something, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like it was almost out of like support and hope. And then the price shot up, it came crashing down. And then when it shot up again, I made the mistake of selling.
Mm-hmm.
And since that time, I have been trying to accumulate as many Bitcoin as I sold. And I have been stacking hard since 2016, and I'm still not there. So I was talking to Charlie Shrim about this, and he had the same experience. It's like, and that is what teaches you to never sell your Bitcoin. When you sell it and you realize you're never going to get it back.
100%. I've heard a version of the story from several people actually that have been around Bitcoin for a while. I myself am in a similar boat. Bought in 14, sold in 14 on that run up. I think it was 14, maybe it was 15. No, 14 was the peak. So it was like late 13, or maybe it was sold in 13. Anyways, I am not back to that number. And so now it's like, it's kind of this target in your mind. You're just trying to like reacquire where you would have been had you just held.
Isn't that interesting? I mean, mine is such a ridiculous arbitrary number. It just happens to be the number of Bitcoin. And that is this mental target that I have. And there's very little chance that I get to that target. Very little chance. So don't get me wrong. We all feel like we don't have enough.
Yeah.
But, I'm sure that by normal terms, we have a lot on a relative basis, but especially if you start doing math by 8 billion people, right?
Yeah.
But it stings a little bit.
Yeah, it stings. And I mean, I guess it's a little bit helpful to start thinking in terms of sats instead. Like that just, at least it sounds better from a unit bias standpoint.
Yeah, it does. It allows us to compete with some of these colossal shit coins where it's like you can fat finger the number of zeros by like 1 and you've 10x the whole thing. It's just it's so silly. It's so silly.
Now
but I don't think about it in that term. I don't get hung up on the sats bits, that game.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
Whatever people want to do is however they want to call it is fine with me.
Yeah, I've just found like some of my contractors and stuff I pay in Bitcoin, and so now it's like thinking in you're just translating to sats and dollars a lot. So because they demand to be paid in Bitcoin. Well, I try to work with Bitcoiners. Actually, I found it just to be better overall. They get it, they're aligned with it. They seem to work with more purpose and passion. So versus people that don't get it, they're just not gonna give you that same level of commitment, I suppose.
I know it's always like a brutal double-edged sword for me when someone is like savvy enough to insist on getting Bitcoin for whatever it is they're providing, and then I have to respect it, but I also hate parting with any amount of Bitcoin. Like the artist that made the full node sculpture, I bought one of his, he did these public and private keys. I bought one of the public keys the other day. And even after knowing him for as long as I have, and I still said to him, and I think he even did an anonymous tweet about it, but it was me where he said, that one of his friends asked if they could pay for the key in dollars. And I was like, dude, I will give you more dollars than you're asking for. Just let me give you dollars. I'm going to see you Sunday anyway. And he's like, you fucking kidding me? No. He's like, don't you know me? I'm like, all right, I'll give you Bitcoin, man.
I just make sure to always keep, because I'm still buying Bitcoin basically every day. So just make sure to always keep my inflows well above my outflows.
Yeah.
And so that works for me. So you mentioned Bitcoin conference in 2013 that got you started. What turned you onto the Bitcoin conference itself originally?
As a tech VC guy, it was just go to different industry related conferences, see what the new things are, see where the opportunities are. And most of the conferences are kind of like, I don't know, you walk around, you see what people are doing, and maybe you find something interesting, maybe you don't. If it's a segment that you're interested in, you go to that conference and then you're really interested in hearing what all the different businesses do, what segments of that industry they're in, focus on the segments that you think are the most interesting, that kind of thing. And sometimes it's just, hey, let's go see what this is about. And for the Bitcoin conference in Miami, it was just go see what this is about.
It's awesome.
And it was like, people walking around at that time with like, it seemed like everybody's t-shirt said that they would help you set up your wallet, and nothing was user-friendly. Nothing was user-friendly. It was very intimidating.
Yeah.
Still, I think it still is.
Yeah, this is Coinbase launched in what, 14 maybe?
No, I purchased on Coinbase.
So it's on Coinbase.
December 13, yeah.
That must have been surreal for you then this past year at Bitcoin 2021, and that you saw it come almost full circle, right? From this little infantile industry to, Saylor's headlining the event, and I don't know, 14,000 people at the conference, I think.
The developments that have taken place in the last 12 months, I don't know, maybe I'm not that much of a visionary, but they really have surpassed what I thought I would see in this kind of time frame. I didn't think I'd see public institutions putting it on their balance sheet. I definitely didn't think I'd see a country declare it legal tender. Pardon me. I didn't think I would see banks kind of being forced to capitulate and adopt it the way they have. I didn't think the US regulatory landscape would be so incredibly constructive. I didn't think we would get it out of China and turn that into such a positive so quickly. But it's like any other technology that the world has decided they want. Once people have decided they want something, man, it's really hard to keep it from them. If you think about the taxis lighting cars on fire and stuff with Uber, when they didn't want Uber, and it was in real cities, London, Paris, but the people of the world decided they wanted Uber. And Bitcoin is way more powerful than that. I mean, Uber raised more than $10 billion that they spent on marketing and fighting these fights. Bitcoin's never spent a penny, or a sat, right? I mean, this is just something that's truly captured the hearts and minds and passion of, it's not hyperbole to say the entire world. So
yeah, it's truly staggering. It just seems unique to the extent that human nature is like a core component of Bitcoin. Like it's because it's money and it's a social construct. It creates its own religion almost, right? We talk about the maximalists and all these things. Like there's people that are just zealous about Bitcoin. But I don't know. I've tried to describe it as a humanitarian movement, because you can't just call it a tech. The tech doesn't capture everything that it is. There's all of these questions coming off of it, and people reevaluating their worldviews. It's tremendous, frankly.
It's tremendous. The most amazing thing to me, and Saylor and I talk about this quite a bit, is it just seems like at every single turn with Bitcoin, there doesn't need to be an aggrieved party. There's never an aggrieved party as an institution, an individual, a country adopts Bitcoin. Nobody suffers. It's just amazing to me, right? And there's no zero-sum game here, right? Like nobody's losing for Bitcoin to win. And to me, that's been the most exciting aspect, is that nobody has to lose for Bitcoin to win.
Yeah, that's maybe a good way to look at it, is it's just the ultimate positive sum game, right? And it's really every human is incentivized to not only buy it, but then once you've bought it, to evangelize it.
Which I know smacks of like MLM and, confidence game, MLM kind of aspects, but it all depends what lens you look through things. I mean, if you wanted to be critical, you could pull back and look at pretty much any institution on the planet that way.
Yeah, well, to the point about money, it does exhibit it's a network, right? So if you're first to figure out that gold is going to monetize and you buy all the damn gold, well, then you're going to be richer than the people that buy it later. It's an unavoidable economic reality of money. But you're right, though. It's hard to disentangle that from all of the real MLM scams and pyramid schemes and all these things that are in the world today. So you Bitcoin 2013, you hear about it, you're thinking about starting a business, trying to figure out, what the right approach is, I guess. Where do you go from there?
I bought a bunch of Bitcoin, which as we said, I sold too early. And then in 2016 kind of time frame, I had stayed in and around the space and crypto in general. In 2016, as things were kind of heating up again, all of my friends started to get interested in the space, and they start calling and asking, what's going on? What are you doing? And I had like a handful of friends who were really interested in learning. And I said, okay, I'm investing in all kinds of different things in the space, not just Bitcoin. And I'm on all these crazy exchanges all over the world, and countries you can't pronounce, buying ICOs that may or may not have any value, et cetera. And I said, look, everybody can give me a couple bucks. I'll send out an email every week, and I'll tell you what we did, why we did it, where we're doing it, and we'll all kind of go up the learning curve together. And maybe we'll make some money, maybe we won't. And so I did that for about 6 months. It was a rising tide, you just kind of couldn't miss. And so the returns were ridiculous. And most importantly for me, I was just enjoying what I was doing. And I liked the space. I liked, Bitcoin, the tokens, the coins, the value propositions. This was like massive technology venture capital consolidated into one little universe that I could get my head around. So I decided I was going to start a crypto hedge fund. And putting on my VC hat, I decided to check the landscape, competitive landscape. And to my surprise, I found that there were about 400 VC funds in the crypto space at that time, which was like mind blowing to me. And, got to be intellectually honest if you're going to be an investor. So I was like, all right, let me check a couple of these guys out and see what kind of edge they have, and if I feel like I have any edge. And I came to the conclusion that not only did I not have any edge over some of these funds, but I would happily pay them their fees to invest in their fund and have their edge. There's all kinds of like asymmetric access to information, self-fulfilling prophecy from some of these funds, where if they invest in a project, it's going to be successful because they've got these investors in the project. And so I went to go give, one of the funds that I picked out some money, and they said, yeah, we'd love to have you in. It's a $2 million minimum. And I was like, oh, that's not happening. So I went to another fund that I was impressed with, and they had a different strategy. And I went to go give them money, and they also had a ridiculously high minimum. And that happened, about 3 times with the 3 funds that I was interested in investing in. And I looked for what's called a hedge fund of funds, which is which I'd known about because I'd invested in hedge fund of funds in traditional hedge fund of fund space, where you can invest a smaller amount than the minimums of these funds, and you get a portfolio of the hedge funds, run by this manager. And so I couldn't find one. And I went to a buddy of mine from the VC world, a guy named Fred Wilson, who runs a firm in New York called Union Square Ventures. And he was extremely active in this space. He was the first money in Coinbase and had seeded a number of these VC funds, and even owned part of the general partnership in some of them. And we were kind of friendly. And I went to Fred and said, hey, this is my idea. What do you think about starting a fund of funds? And like before I could even finish, he said, I think it's an awesome idea. You should do it. And his exact words were, run, don't walk. And so that day I started the very challenging thing of forming a crypto related fund in the United States, which was not easy at the time. Try getting a checking account was not easy. But anyway, and then I launched my fund in February 2018, which is called Blockchain Investment Group. And that fund allocates capital to various crypto hedge funds.
Awesome. Yeah, very cool. The fund of funds, that's taken off too, right? Because I know there was an explosion of funds originally post
Yeah,
2017, and then I guess fund of funds started to blow up as well.
I don't think so. There are only a handful of us.
Mm,
Fortunately, we have the longest track record and the best track record.
mm.
Even though we launched at a pretty inauspicious time in February 2018, at one point we were down 60%, 6-0. We didn't have a
Wow.
single investor leave. And now my investors are up about 1,000%, 10x net of fees from their initial investment. So got some happy investors, and I think there's good things ahead. So yeah, but there'll be other. I'm sure there'll be more, and that's good for the industry as a whole. The fund also holds Bitcoin directly as well as in allocating capital to other hedge funds. And then I also have a Bitcoin exclusive fund, which is just for family offices and high net worth individuals who want to own Bitcoin, but do it in a way that's more consistent with how they're used to making investments. And there are some unique attributes of that fund that I won't bore you with. But the key thing is it's one of the only funds where if and when an investor chooses to leave the fund, they can actually get Bitcoin. Give us the wallet address, we'll send you your Bitcoin.
Oh, nice.
That was the key aspect to do it. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. And then so you've talked to me offline a little bit about this new paradigm of asset allocation.
Yeah. So you remember like if you think of like traditional finance, there are like those, you go to an investment advisor and they'll give you like a pie chart of what the traditional portfolio that they suggest for you is, oh, you should be 50% stocks and 20% bonds, and you should have 10% in cash and short-term liquid assets and gold and the like, and you should have this percentage in alternative investments and foreign equities and things like that. And then they'll kind of tweak that portfolio a little bit based on your risk profile. And so what I've been kind of talking about recently, I mean, I view my role as really like a digital asset manager. And so I'm speaking to all different kinds of pools of capital, primarily family offices and high net worth individuals, as well as some institutions, and kind of explaining to them how to think about getting exposure to this space and how to allocate their capital. And so the new paradigm portfolio, the way I see it, is I've got Bitcoin, which I think is the emerging and new store of value. And that kind of has taken the place of all short-term investments, gold, which has failed miserably and is not working at all, and fixed income in the entire bond piece. Right now, you've got $17 trillion of sovereign debt that's negative yielding. You've got, I think, over $100 trillion of sovereign debt that's yielding like 1% or less. Obviously, the shorter end of the curve there. And even like the longer end of the curve where you're getting 3%, in real terms, you're locking in a loss, right? The inflation rate is going up by more than 3%. You're locking in a 3% return. All you've done is guaranteed that you're going to lose money and lose purchasing power in real terms over a long period of time, which is just insane to me. So I don't think there's any reason to have capital in that. And I think all of those buckets should go into Bitcoin. So new paradigm, I think about a third of people's net worth. And obviously it depends on, how risk averse you are or whatever, but about a third of people's money should go into Bitcoin. And you can even steal some of the big tech equity exposure for Bitcoin as well, because as we shift to this new store of value, there's going to be a supply demand imbalance as more and more capital comes over from gold and other sources, and we're going to see outsized performance. So in the short term, I think it can actually steal a lot of the equity allocation as well. So, somewhere between 30% and all of your money, maybe. And then depending on how you are from risk averse to Saylor, I guess. I'll stop at 100% of your assets. I won't go as far as more than 100%, being the prudent guy that I am. But and then I think there's also a reason to have exposure to other technologies in the digital asset class, and I view them very separately. I think of Bitcoin as this emerging store of value that is going after this multi-$100 trillion opportunity, and I think of other areas of crypto and digital assets as venture capital in a new asset class that is going to grow dramatically and be a big thing. And I don't think they're diametrically opposed in any way. I don't think they need to be enemies. I think it is unfortunate from a marketing point of view that the media lumps us all together in the term crypto. And we've got true shit coins like the dog coins and the like lumped in with other assets that potentially deliver real value and change the world.
Yeah, it's well said. That's exactly how I describe it, is that, Bitcoin is in a class of its own. To your earlier point, it is the internet, basically. It's just another protocol, only in this case for moving economic value instead of information, but it's another permissionless protocol that's built right on top of the internet. I mean, it basically is the internet. And everything else is liquid venture capital, and that world is interesting. I don't know if anything's market proven yet. And I've been spending some brain cycles and having some conversations on how do we quantify decentralization. Like, I think that's a big unknown still, because everything has to start out centralized. Even Bitcoin was just an idea in Satoshi's mind before it became what it is. So the question I'm ruminating on is what other market niches demand decentralization, and can projects cross the chasm? And if they can, how do we know? Where do you draw the line? So that's an interesting place to think about. I want to speak to the allocation piece a little bit. There's this old, I think it's in old Jewish texts where the advice was hold a third of your wealth in land, a third of your wealth in your business, and a third of your wealth in cash. And so I feel like the world will kind of move that direction as a result of Bitcoin. We're so heavy weighted equities and stuff now because of fiat currency, right? The incentives related to that. And for me, so I'm trying to be ahead of the curve and kind of adopt that myself, but it just so happens cash is Bitcoin to me. Like, I denominate myself in Bitcoin.
I was going to make that point. Even Ray Dalio says, fiat cash is trash, right? So what constitutes cash today? And I think Bitcoin has to be the majority of that. Certainly it is for me.
Yeah.
And then how much of the others does Bitcoin usurp, right? Because it certainly is big tech and it is emerging, and it's all those other things as well. So I think present day, it probably gets an outsized allocation relative to the whole pie. And maybe 10, 15, 100 years from now, it starts to take on more of a traditional cash role.
Agreed.
In size. So I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do know that if you don't have exposure to it, it's a problem. And what's really interesting is, having kind of been a digital asset manager for a while, just hearing how these big pools of capital and these family offices who have tremendous resources, not just financial resources, but contacts, education, informational resources, and to hear how their view is evolving, and to hear how they're looking for exposure to Bitcoin and why they're looking for exposure to Bitcoin has really been very interesting dialogue over the years. And it's changed dramatically in the last 6 months.
Yes. Yeah. The number go up, or Bitcoin price action, dramatically changes that conversation. As we were saying offline,
I think it's more the regulation.
I think
it's more the regulatory landscape. You got enough. A lot of this, I'll use the not so great term, older money, right? But like a lot of this generational wealth, older money, people who are in the stay rich game, not the get rich game. They listen to the Jamie Dimons of the world, the Ray Dalios of the world, the Charlie Mungers of the world, and for good reason, they respect the hell out of them, right? And all of those people that I just mentioned are truly impressive people in a traditional financial environment, and they should be respected. And so they hear them say these negative things, and it scares them away. And they hear Ray Dalio basically, in so many words, say, Bitcoin's too good, the government's going to outlaw it. And then they hear the government say what they're going to do, and they hear Jay Powell and Gary Gensler in front of Congress say, hey, we're not regulating this away. We're not making it illegal. we want to protect investors, we want to do these things, but we're not eliminating it. Combine that with kind of the China thing, it's a nice badge of honor, and you're probably on the right side of things if you're embracing a technology that China's kicked out, right? Mm-hmm. So I was proud of the US's reaction to that. I think that actually helped form things, the direction we're going on the US side. And the family offices and folks that I'm talking to, they're now starting to feel comfortable getting some exposure to Bitcoin, as well as feeling like, oh shit, my money's melting away. And I don't think, it's interesting talking to people with a lot of money, because sometimes you think, well, what do they care? They're going to be fine. They have 500 million, a billion, whatever it is. Like, what do they care? But they really care. And maybe the reason they have the money to begin with is because they care.
Right.
Or if they're just the stewards of a family office of this generation, they certainly want to leave the family office in as good a position, if not better, than they found it. Mm-hmm. And so they don't want the purchasing power of their wealth melting away for the next generations. Mm-hmm. So they really do care. And now they're really looking to embrace Bitcoin in big numbers and meaningful ways.
Yeah, that's interesting. I notice a lot of my conversations pivoting on the price, but I imagine with your conversations focused on that demographic, the regulatory landscape probably shapes it even more. Price
is significant. Sorry, I'll just add one thing. Price is significant at the actual time of investment. Mm-hmm. So like once they've made the decision and they wire me, some money, then they care about the price and the execution. But I think, and this is a beautiful thing for people who care about the price of Bitcoin going up, is it's not the way that real money's thinking about it. What they're thinking about is like they think about gold. And it's that portfolio construct that I was talking about, where it's an allocation, it's a percent of the portfolio. So they say, okay, put 5% in Bitcoin. They don't say put 5% in Bitcoin if it comes down to this price.
Right.
They want 5% in Bitcoin. So it's a portfolio allocation based on the size of the allocation. X number of dollars go into Bitcoin.
And do you see them rebalancing out a lot, say like post bull run?
I don't know. I think that you got to reevaluate the landscape, and it'll depend on the macroeconomic factors. My guess is that there's not a lot of reducing one's Bitcoin exposure for the foreseeable future. I think there's going to be a long period of time where people will only wish they had more and bought more. So I don't think we're going to see too much selling. Mm-hmm. And maybe with some of the new products that are coming on, we just won't see any selling at all. It'll be that asset that you hold forever and borrow against and never sell.
Makes you grateful that we learned our lesson early, right? About selling.
Yeah, albeit pretty painful.
Yeah.
I am glad we learned our lesson early. I won't make that mistake again.
Let me ask you this. So you mentioned gold has clearly been a poor performer in this post-COVID environment of excessive monetary expansion. In my view, I think Bitcoin and let me put it this way. I think the reason most people don't understand Bitcoin clearly is because they don't understand money, hence the name of the show. But because they don't understand money, they don't understand gold, right? It's just kind of been this crisis or this portfolio crisis insurance that no one really understands, but they put it there almost out of inertia, right? People have just been doing it. I view Bitcoin as a disruptor to gold. So I think that's why it's so hard for people to get. What do you think about that? I mean, how do you view gold? Do you think Bitcoin is disruptive to gold? And if so, is that why people like even Ray Dalio don't get it? A guy who's clearly such a proponent for gold can't see, I guess, beneath it to understand Bitcoin.
I think you're exactly right. It's and this is why I've been using this asset allocation model and kind of these pie charts, because that's what people do. They sit down in front of a pie chart and they think about asset allocation. They think about certain wealthy people, right? And they think about where are their assets in the world, and they think, oh, well, I need some gold. They don't even know why they need gold, but gold's been a mainstay on that pie chart, up to 10% for a long time, depending on how, risk averse someone is, right? And they just do that. And I think Bitcoin is going to take the place of that completely. I think gold has failed absolutely miserably. For context, if you go back hundreds of years, there was a time when substantially all the wealth of the world was held in gold, right? Mm-hmm. Now it holds less than 2% of the world's wealth. So I think Bitcoin is absolutely going to crush it. I think that much like every digital successor to an analog predecessor, it doesn't just usurp the exact value of its predecessor. So I don't think Bitcoin is going to go to the 10, 11 trillion that gold is at. I think it's going to go way, way past it. And there are tons of examples. I mean, one of the best being like rotary phones and mobile phones kind of thing, right? And that's a perfect corollary because there's just so much more utility to digital gold and Bitcoin than there is the yellow metal. So I think we're going to see a similar thing. And I think the real beauty of that is, I think that when Bitcoin gets to 5 trillion, 250,000 of Bitcoin, roughly half of gold, I really do think at that point, I don't know what terminology is the right terminology to use, but it becomes really hard to stop. Too big to fail, unstoppable, eat everything, whatever version people like. But at that point, there's enough of the world's wealth in it that you've got such strong constituencies in every area. It's permeated everything: pension funds, endowment funds, indirect holders of stocks, indirect holders of everything, members of Congress, potentially sitting presidents. I mean, who knows, right? So I think it'll be such a part of everyone's wealth that it will be very well protected. And then it really will be some version of unstoppable. That said, as optimistic as I am, I don't think we're there yet. I like the direction, I like the trend, but I still think we're in this is an experiment that's going very well stage.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually really agree with that because I've thought around the $5 trillion market cap. That's when it becomes it's cemented as a macro asset, right? Every capital pool on the planet has to evaluate their strategy in relationship to it at that point.
Right now, we're half the size of a big tech company.
Yeah, right. But very well could be there in the next few months, even if this bull run continues. So
I would think next 2 years, but yeah, year and a half to 2 years, I would think. But yeah. And then the other thing that gives me some agita is I wish that this was the tact that those that wanted to see Bitcoin succeed took, right? I mean, in some ways, it's like Genghis Khan-esque, right? Like, this is like a Trojan horse. If we just play the game to get to 250,000, we don't need to talk about hyper Bitcoinization, taking over the world, toppling all these things. We can get to where we need to go just by being a digital gold, just by rivaling gold, right. Which is a narrative that's not threatening to anyone or anything. Yeah. It gets us property rights. It gets us all these great things. And we can get to where we need to go just by getting to 250. And then people can use whatever flowery language and, radical stuff they want to say. But I think not that Bitcoin should be scared, and I'm not, operating from a position of fear, but it's nice to bring people under the 10 instead of scaring them.
Yeah, that's a great point. And there's a lot of conversation around that. Some people, it's an ongoing conversation, especially when it comes to like the geopolitical game theory related to Bitcoin. People have criticized me for talking about it too much. And I'm like, well, I think the conversations need to be had either in the sunlight or behind closed doors, but I don't know. I'm not completely sure of the right answer.
Me neither. I mean, decentralization doesn't have to mean disorganization.
Yeah. Right. But so back to if it gets to $5 trillion market cap, it does become like you said, I'm not sure which term, a runaway feedback loop, something like that.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like this lesson that there's this old quote, and I don't know who said it, but it's something to the effect that the greatest shortcoming of human beings is our inability to understand the exponential function. And so things that spread exponentially, what is it? You fold a piece of paper in half 50 times and it reaches the sun kind of thing. we're not predisposed to understanding virality, and the digital age has all these viral phenomenon, of which Bitcoin is like the latest and greatest. So it seems like maybe that's contributing to the blind spot too. It's like, even guys, I always look at Dalio because I'm like, Dalio gets money, he gets gold, he gets macro.
I think he gets Bitcoin now too. He owns it. So,
and he's coming around on Bitcoin.
Yeah. But I think you're right. It's that the rate of change, especially in our technologically forward society, is just ever faster. Most people don't understand the power of compound interest. If anyone ever looked at a compound interest table, their mind would be blown, right? At a moderate interest rate of just how quick things accumulate. You can even look at it in negative context and in a non-financial context at just how rapidly things, I won't say spun out of control, but spun in a particular direction during COVID and lockdowns and like bringing the economy and the world to a screeching halt. So yeah, people greatly underestimate the exponential rate of change. Yeah,
and with Bitcoin, it's an exponential decay function of its new supply flow. We cannot understand how scarce this asset is.
It's phenomenal.
It's doubling every 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, there are 52 million millionaires on the planet. There's not even enough for every millionaire to own a half a Bitcoin.
Right.
And then you take out the lost Bitcoin, and then you take out the large hodlers of Bitcoin, and you start to realize, that there's a good chance that half a Bitcoin is going to, be the equivalent to real wealth someday. It's going to make someone a wealthy person. Yeah,
it's incredible. Okay. We're at an hour 30. Do you want to do a break here? Good to keep going. All right, cool.
Yeah.
So you got the fund of funds, and that's what you've been doing since. I'm sorry, when did you launch that?
February 2018.
Okay, gotcha. And so that's going well. You've gone from way down at one point to way up, so everybody's happy.
Yeah. Correct.
Maybe here is a good segue into one of the stories you're most infamous for, which is the orange pilling of the gigachad himself.
Yeah, sure. So Michael and I have been friends for more than 20 years. We hang out quite a bit. And we talk about all kinds of stuff. One of the big topics that we talk about are investments in technology. Michael has a unique gift, kind of tying back to some of the stuff we spoke about before about identifying technological network effects. I mean, if you look at the book, The Mobile Wave, that he wrote, where he kind of predicted exactly how mobile phones and apps would change, dematerialize things and change our lives, he was spot on that. And some people see these things just a little bit earlier than others. And, I think that pertains directly to Bitcoin. But so, initially when I kind of got into the space, Michael, was fairly strong in his language that he didn't think I was making a good career choice. And, so I would still bring it up every once in a while, but he still didn't bite, and he's too polite to tell me I'm a fucking idiot. So we just kind of would change the subject. And then, it was during these COVID lockdowns. We were spending, obviously there wasn't much to do. We were spending a lot of time at his place because the surroundings are quite comfortable. And we're sitting by the pool and we're talking about, we saw the economy coming to a screeching halt, right? We saw what was happening, maybe a little before most people. Certainly Michael saw it before most people. And we realized that the global economy was to a large degree going to get shut down. And so we kind of panicked and sold a lot of our investments, in particular tech investments, thinking that, well, shit, this can't be good. We didn't have an appreciation or factor in the insane money printing that took place and just how that would lead to asset inflation that would dramatically outpace and overshadow, the monetary inflation for a time being in stocks,
Mhm.
right? So like, Disney was one that like drove me crazy. They were in the worst business possible. They
Mhm.
laid off a huge chunk of their employees. Their cruise ships shut down, movie theaters shut down, theme parks shut down. Yeah, they had Disney Plus over the top, but even that's still not expected to be profitable to 2025. And the stock is up 100% from where it was pre-COVID. So is Disney worth 2x what it was, or is maybe the dollar worth less, right? And
Right.
so we sold those things, and we're kind of sitting around scratching our heads, and that scratching our heads turned to a little bit of anger at the money printing that was happening. And Michael remembers me saying, anytime there's big change like this, there's opportunity. We just have to kind of, find what that area of opportunity is. Like, change is good. We need to find the opportunity here.
Mhm.
And then I guess I started talking about Bitcoin, as I often do. And this time, instead of ignoring it or changing the subject, he looked at me very seriously and he said, "Tell me more about this." And that started the better part of a week, certainly a few days worth of as deep a discussion on Bitcoin as I was capable of. And as the world now knows, no one person is capable of providing enough information for Michael on anything. So once he had absorbed everything that I had, he asked me, where else can I learn more? And I pointed him to, a bunch of resources, whatever I could. And he continued to, do his research and go down the rabbit hole. And then I helped him get some access to purchasing Bitcoin. And then one day I'm pulling into a restaurant here to meet some friends for dinner, and the phone rings, and it's him, and he doesn't usually call, usually text. We usually text or something. So it was a little unusual. And so I answered the phone and I'm like, "What's up?" And he says, "Well, I bought some Bitcoin." And I said, "Oh, congratulations." And he said, "Yeah, 10,000. And at the time, Bitcoin was about $10,000 per Bitcoin.
Mhm.
And so I was like, "Really? You're calling me to tell me that you bought one Bitcoin?" So I was like, "You bought one Bitcoin, dude?" And there's a pause, and he goes, "No, Eric, I bought 10,000 Bitcoin." And I was like, "Holy shit, that's $100 million, right?" So I instantly went from trying to orange pill my buddy and getting him into Bitcoin to thinking, "Oh shit, he just put a lot of money into this." And if there's one thing that I've learned in being in Bitcoin, for this time, is that it's volatile, and we all have good days and we all have bad days, so to speak. And all I could think is, I hope that my buddy has a good experience, because that's an awful lot of money. So
Wow.
anyway, that's kind of how it all started.
Wow. That's such an amazing. So I'm sure you were shocked in that moment too. At 10,000. It's just a massive, it's not exactly a
Yeah, I went
dipping
from
toe in the water.
I went from thinking, I got to get this guy involved in this, to what have I done? And you just start thinking like pragmatically, like you don't want it to impact your friendship with somebody like we've
Yeah.
been buddies a long time. And so I'm glad that it's worked out well. And now I think he's purchased north of $3 billion, in total. So what I didn't know at the time was that he was in conversations with his board to try to buy it. And then, this was a personal purchase at 100 million. So yeah, it was certainly a fun and interesting time. And I remember being with him when Bitcoin hit 12,000 after his purchase, and kind of like, we're not obsessed with the price, either one of us, but that was kind of like
Mhm.
like I felt like a weight went off me, and I think we high-fived or something. But it was it was I felt relief. I was like, okay. And so now I'm like, just for the record, this has all worked out well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so
and
far, so good. I mean, his timing was great. So that was definitely helpful.
yeah,
And
he's
that's,
got a gift for spotting these things. But I think even equally importantly is like the ethos and the passion. And I think everybody in life, you got to stand for something,
mhm. Yeah.
and it kind of ties into the political conversation we had. And this was something that we both believe in. I mean, you can hear it in the passion and all the time you've spent with him and other chats he's given. I mean, he is all in, not just from a financial point of view, but from a passion, emotional, and genuinely believes in Bitcoin in every aspect of it, in helping the world. So I think he's thrilled that he's found another thing in life. Not that he was lacking something between his company and education, but he's found something in life that he's happy to put his time and effort and money into.
Yeah, I think, that's what really makes him stand apart. Frankly, it's clearly his financial move into Bitcoin is massive, right? But it's that in addition to all of the explanatory framework where he's I mean, again, I read his book, Mobile Wave, in preparation for our series together. I mean, this guy gets it. He gets tech.
Yep.
He gets network effects. He gets history. He gets these implications.
It's unbelievable.
But he's still hats off to you for persevering on the orange pilling, because I would be questioning myself. Like, if a guy like that was telling me, Bitcoin's bogus, dude, and you're like, well, this guy fucking gets it. What am I not seeing?
We've had a number of other related conversations. I mean, I remember, I think it was probably 2013, 2014 timeframe. We were on vacation somewhere, and he started telling me how the die is cast and Apple has won. And at the time, Apple had about 20% of the mobile phone market, and Android had roughly 80. And we had this really interesting long conversation where he explained to me that, the iOS platform might only have 20% of the users, but it's got 80% of the world's money, and that iOS was going to win and Apple was going to crush it. And the analogy he used at the time, because he's great at analogies, was if you own banks, would you rather have 20% of the banks and 80% of the world's money, or 80% of the banks and 20% of the world's money? And so, hey, I made big investments in Apple based on that conversation. But yes, he gets it. He gets it earlier than most. He's got a gift for seeing these things, and then he just has unbelievable guts and fortitude to go all in. He had a nice lifestyle before this. He did not need to go all in on Bitcoin, but he did. Yeah. And he believes in it so passionately and so strongly.
Yeah. Again, we were talking about Genghis Khan at the beginning of this, to have leaders that lead from the front, he actually put his money where his mouth is. He put his skin in the game. And I would argue he is even exhibiting soul in the game, right? He is taking certain types of risk to be so publicly outspoken about it. But to represent it, and to represent Bitcoin philosophically, even, and that he's explaining the why as much as he's explaining the what.
The other great thing about him kind of taking the role that he's taken with this, from my point of view, is the Michael that you've talked to for hours and recorded, and the other podcasts. That's Michael every day. So, when tonight after we're done, when I go over to his place for dinner, this is what conversation is. And you get exactly that on whatever the topic du jour is. And you get it based on historical context, supported by facts, with off the cuff analogies and comparisons that are factually accurate, all in a stream of consciousness. And it's just an unbelievable, the best thing about being friends with Michael is access to his brain, and and just hearing his thoughts, because it's extraordinary. And so what I love about the role that he's taken with Bitcoin is, now with the millions and millions of views that you've generated and everybody else, now that gets shared with the world. And I think that's a great thing.
I could not agree more. And he's just been, a tremendous asset, frankly, to the space. And it caught me so off guard, frankly, because I think it was maybe August 2020. Is that when he bought originally, or when the headline came out? Maybe not him personally, but MicroStrategy.
Correct. Yeah, correct.
And at the time,
August,
it's
September, maybe.
Bitcoin had got annihilated in March, like every risk on asset, and then it had slowly started to come back. And we were just kind of, Bitcoin world was just chugging along, writing and talking about it.
He wanted to buy it then. The conversations we had took place a little earlier. He was really interested in buying some during that dip, but onboarding takes a long time.
Yeah, I bet, especially at that volume.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just caught me off guard. Whereas, like, we've been kind of writing and talking about this for a long time, and to see it make waves at that level that quickly, it was just a very powerful reminder how interconnected the whole world is and how fast things can move. So
I think it also highlights the difference an individual can make, and there are plenty of very influential, very well-respected individuals right now that I know of that own a lot of Bitcoin, like billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. And if those people would come forward and step into the limelight, for better or worse, the way Michael had the courage to, the ball would get moved forward, because these are people that everybody respects. And so props to Elon. I give Elon some credit, which I'm sure people hate me for, but props to him for doing it publicly and saying publicly that it's really the only material thing he owns other than stock in his companies. And I just think we need more of these people who are big hodlers of Bitcoin to have the courage to say it publicly.
Yeah.
A good thing for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. And frankly, it's increasingly in your self-interest to do so, right? Again, there's risk associated with the visibility, but there's also a benefit. And it does seem to be a one direction rabbit hole. I don't know anyone that goes into this thing and comes out. Like, people just
absolutely
fall deeper and deeper into it. And your conviction grows in tandem. So
it goes back to what we said at the beginning, right? About it just kind of being so closely tied and so consistent with the values upon which this country were founded. And if you get down to an individual human level, who doesn't like the values upon which this were founded? How do you not value freedom? How do you not value sovereignty? And the more you research Bitcoin and the further you go down the rabbit hole, the more you identify those aspects. And when you peel away some political bullshit that may be, coloring your view, and you get down to the basics and the purity of it, it's very hard not to be moved.
Agreed completely. And, again, it's a modern innovation, but you'll never comprehend the profundity of it until you look backward and you look across history. Like, how did we get to America? This, and even before America, we had this in the Magna Carta, the natural law tenets of life, liberty, and property, right? We've been working towards something like Bitcoin for, almost all of human civilization, right? Even Genghis Khan was a contributor to this indirectly.
Absolutely.
And
absolutely.
And I love that Michael does this too. He focuses on the property right aspects, because that is the bedrock of civilization. And that's a good framing for Bitcoin, is that it is the most expensive form of property to violate in human history, right? It doesn't require physical enforcement. It's impossible to inflate, very hard to steal. So it's very important for civilization, for future civilization.
Not only that, I think property rights are so well established in our society and come with so many benefits that the single best thing that Bitcoin could be categorized as for all of us who love Bitcoin is property. And to foster narratives pushing for Bitcoin to be categorized as something else, a currency, a this, a that, in my humble opinion, is extremely counterproductive. Property is where you want to be. A United States senator can, on the Senate floor, advocate for property. They can't advocate for a security or something else, right? So it's property is key.
Yeah.
Property is a key way forward for us.
Yeah. Well said. I could not agree more. Eric, man, thank you for orange pilling our mightiest hero.
We all do what we can for Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, we all have a job to do, which is another amazing thing about Bitcoin, is that we're all part of this decentralized organization, Like it is one big business. You know, we all have our own, I guess, equity stake in it through holding Bitcoin, but we're also all pulling in the same direction, which makes it just so powerful.
I agree. It's an unstoppable all-star team of people where, every time I turn on television and there's another person on TV promoting Bitcoin, it's not Michael from another corner of the world.
Mhm.
It's just amazing. We've got people in every corner of the planet 24/7, and nobody's getting paid to do it. And nobody's getting their marching orders from any particular place. It's just a bunch of people with shared basic human beliefs coming together to try to make the world a better place and promote this thing.
The beauty of life, liberty, and property in action, right?
Exactly.
Where can my audience find you if they want to learn more about you or your business?
Twitter is probably the best way. It is Eric_BIG Fund. Eric_Big Fund, Bitcoin Investment Group Fund.
Awesome. Easy name to remember. Thanks for doing this. And I guess I'll be seeing you pretty soon in Miami.
My pleasure. See you soon in Miami. Thanks again. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Eric.